And right now we're seeing the impact of fear on Capitol Hill. I mean, after Senator Joni Ernst issued what could be best characterized as a lukewarm statement about Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, the MAGA fear-mongering machine, went into overdrive, completely, after she issued that statement. And Elon Musk-backed super PAC ran an ad in Ernst's home state, pushing Iowans to tell their senator to support Hegseth. Influential MAGA-land firebrands like radio host Charlie Kirk threatened to recruit a primary challenger against Ernst at the end of her term. And a local Iowa radio host said on his show last week, quote, "If the king wants a different senator from Iowa, we'll have one. If he doesn't, we won't." I think someone's got to be made an example of, out of, whether it's Joni or someone else. And guess what happened? Well, all of that pressure kind of seemed to work. A few days after her lukewarm statement, Senator Ernst met with Hegseth again and changed her tune. She didn't promise to vote for him, but she did issue a new statement that was far more supportive. So basically, before the confirmation hearings have even kicked off, and they won't until January, the one Republican senator who was brave enough to express even a hint of concern about a nominee who, frankly, is quite concerning, and we've talked about him a lot on the show, was met with a whirlwind of intimidation and threats, which prompted her to pull back her concerns and obey the wishes of MAGA world in advance. And today, Trump made very clear there's more where that came from. When asked if senators who oppose his nominees should be primaried, this is what he had to say.
If they are unreasonable, I'll give you a different answer, an answer that you'll be shocked to hear. If they're unreasonable, if they're opposing somebody for political reasons or stupid reasons, I would say has nothing to do with me. I would say they probably would be primary.
So you're obviously seeing the impact of fear on Capitol Hill, and given it seemed to work, it's probably not going to let up anytime soon. And we're also seeing the impact of fear on the media right now. Over the weekend, the New York Times reported on a flurry of threatened defamation lawsuits planned by the incoming administration, saying all aimed at intimidating news outlets and others who have criticized or questioned Trump and his nominees to run the Pentagon and FBI. It's not really a mystery as to why more of these lawsuits are planned when you take a look at the other news from this weekend. ABC agreed to pay $15 million to settle a defamation lawsuit brought by Trump and his team. And that lawsuit stemmed from comments anchor George Stephanopoulos made in an interview earlier this year. Stephanopoulos said Trump had been found liable for rape in the E. Jean Carroll case, when in fact Trump had been found liable for sexual abuse. An ABC News spokesperson said in a statement about the settlement, "We are pleased that the parties have reached an agreement to dismiss the lawsuit on the terms in the court filing." Now, we don't really know all the reasons why they agreed to settle. It's a case, though, that several legal experts have said was worth more of a fight. But now it's over. And if you're Trump and his team, what does that teach you? It teaches you that tactics like this can work and that you should keep at them. As if on cue, Trump threatened a whole lot more at the same press conference earlier today.
Oh, I do. I think you have to do it because they're very dishonest. We need a great media. We need a fair media. I'm going to be bringing one against the people in Iowa, their newspaper, which had a very, very good pollster who got me right all the time. And then just before the election, she said I was going to lose by 3 or 4 points. We'll probably be filing a major lawsuit against them today or tomorrow. We're involved in one which has been going on for a while and very successfully against Bob Woodward, where he didn't quote me properly. I feel I have to do this. I shouldn't really be the one to do it. It should have been Justice Department or somebody else, but I have to do it. It costs a lot of money to do it, but we have to straighten out the press. Our press is very corrupt.
Look, I know each of these things might not seem like a huge deal on their own. A Republican senator came around to being more supportive of her party's nominee. A media company settled with Trump. Neither is necessarily blaring front page news. I'm not here to freak you out about things you shouldn't be freaked out about. But taken together, along with Trump publicly threatening to do more, creates a bit of a pattern that's important to follow and watch. And it goes like this. Trump and his team decide they don't like something. They employ threats and pressure and intimidation to change the thing they don't like, and it works. And that means they're incentivized to do it again. I don't say this to minimize the fear of litigation or the risk of losing political power or the threat to the safety and security of many public officials that they face. That is all very real and justified, and some of it's quite scary. But it's important to remember that what this pattern could lead to is a country where journalists don't feel comfortable speaking truth to power, where elected officials don't hold people accountable. This pattern sets off a slippery slope that leads to serious threats to free speech, to the free press and the role of the free press, to a society that is simply too afraid to speak out. That's the impact of obedience in advance. Starting us off tonight is Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. He sits on the Foreign Relations and Oversight Committees. Senator, it's great to see you. I just wanted to start with where I ended there. I just spelled out this culture of fear and the impact that seems to already be settling in, even before Donald Trump's second term starts. I wonder, as you watched MAGA World, what they did to Senator Ernst and her own then kind of dialing back of her concerns about Pete Hegseth, what level of concern you have about that?
I mean, I think this is a red alert moment, and I know we all want to be a little careful about not sort of setting the conversation on fire even before Trump has been sworn in. But I think the narrative that you just laid out is really, really important. There are not just two things in this world, democracies and dictatorships. There are all sorts of countries in this world that occupy a gray zone in between a democracy where you regularly have different political parties and different leaders changing power, exchanging power, and dictatorships where only one person, one party is in control. There are lots of places that still have elections, but the opposition is muted, is too weak to ever win. And so people get to vote, but the same people hold on to power decade after decade. The way that happens is pretty routine. The press stops telling the true story. People are punished for organizing political opposition. And all of that seems to be a priority for Donald Trump when he takes the White House. And you see it already happening. Elon Musk, because he's got lots of political interests, has already essentially folded his operation into the White House. Your parent company has decided that owns MSNBC has decided to sell MSNBC, likely because it just doesn't want to run afoul of Donald Trump. Jeff Bezos instructed his papers not to make endorsements because his bread is buttered in part by government contracts that Donald Trump will be in charge of. You're already seeing people with power in this country, people who own the information highways, starting to cower, starting to step aside. And when a true, real story can't be told about people in power, what that does is rob agency from voters, but also from the political opposition. Listen, I hope that does not happen starting on January 20th, but I think you were very right to lay out the real possibility that we are in for a very difficult and dangerous assault on the free press and open democracy.
Let me just ask you another question about that, because I've spent a lot of time overseas. You've spent a lot of time overseas and in the national security space. And there are examples of other countries when you travel to other countries, and there's a complete repression of the free press. Russia, China, some Eastern European countries. Talk to our viewers a little bit about how that happens and what you see the impact is in these countries in terms of accountability for the leaders.
Well, in Russia and China, there is zero space for political dissent, as we've seen over and over again. Anybody that publicly opposes Vladimir Putin will be killed, poisoned. But there are other countries in which there is some but limited space for political dissent. Take a country like Hungary or a country like Serbia. These are technically democracies. There are elections, but it is virtually impossible for the political opposition to win because the press is either owned by the regime, or when the press is not owned by the regime, it is intimidated into submission. It's very hard to recruit people to join your political opposition group because they will be targeted and harassed often by the regime. So there are elections, but the political opposition very rarely ever wins. And that could be where the United States ends up. If all of a sudden the press stops telling the real story, so there's no accountability for Donald Trump, and there are just enough political harassment and law enforcement harassment of Democrats, as Trump is suggesting, or pollsters who are disseminating results that are good for Democrats, you all of a sudden could see something that looks a little bit more like Hungary or Serbia here in the United States.
There's so many things I want to ask you about, but you are one of the most thoughtful people on addressing gun violence. And we saw actually a couple of shootings today, one that got a lot of attention for good reason in Wisconsin at a school. And yesterday was just the anniversary of Sandy Hook, which I know is still very close to your heart. I'm just wondering, I'm a parent, you're a parent, there's been progress at the state level, which is important to acknowledge. But how do you process moments like this? And how should people who feel powerless process moments like this?
Well, yeah, this is obviously a heavy time of the year. Those parents in Sandy Hook have to relive that nightmare every December, but every time they turn on the news and see another school shooting, as we saw today, I think it is important to remember that we have power. And you're right that a lot of states have tightened their laws. But 2 years ago, we actually changed the federal laws. We made 5 major changes to gun laws. We put a lot of new resources into mental health programming, into community anti-gun violence initiatives. That was the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And not coincidentally, since we passed that act, murder rates in our cities are down by 20%. School shootings, mass shootings in this country are down by over 20%. None of us should rest until not a single child fears for their life in school or walking to school. But there are literally thousands of kids and young adults who are alive today because we did build a movement to stop gun violence that successfully changed the law at the federal level. So these are moments of great sadness when we get to the middle of December in Sandy Hook and across the country. But they are moments to remember that we have power. And when we exercise that power, we actually do and have over the last 2 years saved lives.